fresh, so pleased with your lives as I am, and it's a good thing to see. I love to see Chris Kopp back, Al Coates, Helen Exley, who did wonderful things for me when I was publisher, when I had great difficulties often in putting together presentations for the corporate bosses. But the little speech that Chuck had made in my time as publisher, it reminded me of were any of you people here, remember Billy Kell?
Oh yeah.
I remember going to the Billy Kell going away party at Petersburg, at the Blue Moon, which is now closing apparently. And he sang a song about his life at the record. And it reminded me of my time as publisher. And the name of the song was Pissing in the Wind. I never forgot that. It's been on my mind for years. Anyway, I was at the record, and I may repeat myself a little bit, and I'm not a funny person, other than I remember pissing in the wind. For 28 years. Those were the best times of my life. If I had regrets, and I made a list of 2 regrets I have, and some people ask you if you had any regrets about certain things. One was when we lived in Barrie and I worked in Toronto. I commuted 3 hours a day each from Toronto to Barrie every day, and I worked at the Star for 10, 11 hours a day. So I missed out on a lot of the family activities that I should have been there for. My other regret is that I was never able to work with Paul Motes as publisher and the Motes family. It would have been phenomenal. However, that isn't what it was. Let me go back to the beginning. I worked at the Galt Reporter for about 2.5 years, and I did everything that you do with a Thompson paper. I turned in the pencil stub for a new pencil. If I wanted a new notebook, I had to prove the one I had was full already on both sides of the paper, and that all happened. And you worked long hours.
It did.
Yeah.
Bob Hamill.
Yes.
My dream, though, was to work at the record. And when it was time, I applied for a job, and this is where I'm almost screwed it up. Cully Schmidt interviewed me, and a lot of people never told me. A lovable guy, the kind of guy you want to hug as soon as you see him. We had a little chat, and he said, oh, okay, $72 a week, and that's what I was making. And my stubborn streak kind of took over, and I said, oh, I guess I'm going to have to think about that, because I was already making that. And it was a bigger paper and a bigger job, and I thought maybe it would be worth more. Cully said, whoop, thanks for coming. And I laughed and thought I had totally blown it. A few weeks later, Eddie Hayes called and offered me $75, and it was done. My first week at the record was in January. It was freezing cold, and I'm walking north on Queen Street. Jim Pitcher, do people remember W.J. Jim Pitcher? Doc, covered courts, and for some reason classical music. It seemed like a natural fit. And I was walking north, and it was very cold. I had a beige reporter-style raincoat on, and I was shivering and shaking. And Jim said, oh, Doc, don't you have a warm coat? Well, this is what I have, Jim. A week later, Jim brought me a warm, dark wool coat to wear. Jim also was a guy who quoted unusual poetry from time to time. He covered classical music in Toronto, like the symphony in Toronto. One of the last of the characters, other than Gene McCarthy, he put his tux in a brown grocery bag, took the bus to Toronto, changed at Union Station, covered the concerts, and then came back by bus that evening and wrote the reviews. I covered a lot of municipal politics, which I loved, and for maybe 4 or 5 years, and then I was appointed features and pictures editor. And 1973, the Record moved to Fairway Road, and the surprise of all time to me, and I think everybody in the building, was I was appointed managing editor in 1975, and I really was basically a city copy editor. I was not assistant city editor, I wasn't city editor. And I'm forever grateful to Sandy Barrett, John Motes, and the Motes family for the opportunity I got at that time. A little story about Mr. Motes, and everybody called him Mr. Motes. He was not well. I went to visit him at St. Mary's Hospital, and he asked me how I was doing. I went to see how he was doing. I just had the new job. He asked me how I was doing, and I told him that I didn't think I had enough to do. I wasn't working hard enough, because I'd moved from work, actually doing work, to sitting in an office. And he said, he kind of propped himself up in his bed, grinned, and said, "Wayne, I'm not paying you to work. I'm paying you to worry." Which I did. For some reason, after 3 years, I was not content enough, and I moved to Barrie, as Chuck has already told you, and worked for two ministries in the province after I left Barrie. And I do want one little story. When you get out of this business, you realize there are so many people in the world that are dedicated and good at what they do. And I met a man by the name of Jamal Hassan at the Ministry of Consumer and Commercial Relations. And I was not comfortable with doing budgeting and planning. Jamal was a very smart young man. We became good friends. And he taught me everything I needed to know about budgeting, strategic planning, visioning, and business planning by saying, "Wayne, let's go for a walk." We walked out on Yonge Street at 555 Yonge, walked down to 1 Yonge and back, and that was my lesson. And I used that everywhere I went. Just that one walk with this fellow that I liked and knew what he was doing. The record was sold in 1989. Many of you were there, maybe all of you were there. I kind of knew it was coming in advance. Wasn't the thing I was really happy about, but when you look back at it, it was the right decision for the Motes family, for sure. I became publisher in 1990, but I did have to go through some hoops with the Southern organization before they realized who I was, and I knew who they were. But I was made a publisher. 1990 to 2001, if I have when I think back about that time, which is a decade and plus a half a year, what I missed most, because of the push and the pressure to be a corporate person, all you people, working more closely with everybody who's in this room. I spent a lot of time out of town. I spent a lot of time in Toronto, I spent a lot of time in Ottawa, I spent a lot of time in Vancouver, or wherever they were having some of the publishers' meetings. So during that time, I worked for 6 different companies. I had 13 different bosses that I reported to. I didn't know them well, they didn't know me well. So that decade is in a way kind of a lost decade for me in terms of I guess doing my best to continue to do what I believed in, which was to work for this paper and for you people, and not work for the corporations. I always believed that I worked for the Record, not for Southern, not for Hollinger, not for Sun Media, not for Torstar, because we knew the paper, we knew the market, we knew the community. We knew what we were doing. We were good at it. We were all great at it. Most of the owners knew that as well.